So today's guest is the author of one of the most impactful books that I read in 2023. Your Body is Your Brain. Leverage your somatic intelligence to find purpose, build resilience, deepen relationships, and lead more powerfully. Amanda teaches about the art and science of embodiment and is a master somatic leadership coach. She got her degree in human biology from Stanford. Now, I remember buying her book for my executive leadership course at Georgetown University last year. And I was probably just as confused as you are now with these words, embodiment and somatic intelligence. However, it has turned out to be an absolute game changer for me personally and for many of the coaches and leaders that I coach. In part one of our conversation with Amanda, we are going to unpack what is somatic intelligence and how it can help us. And in part two of our conversation, we're actually going to come back to how we can leverage somatic intelligence and embodiment as a leader and with our teams. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, the podcast to help you grow as a leader and build a better culture. My name is JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my friends and co-hosts, Nate Sanderson and Betsy Butterick. In addition to this podcast, I'm a leadership coach and culture consultant. To learn more about how my business, TOC, can support you and your team, visit tocculture.com. To learn more about Betsy, go to betsybutterick.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the TOC newsletter. Every Thursday, you'll receive a short article, and you'll also receive the notes to each episode of the podcast, as well as our top 10 podcast episodes and my top 10 articles. You can subscribe using the link in the description of this episode or simply by going over to tocculture.com and click on newsletter in the header. All right, welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, Amanda. We are very excited to have you here, a very special guest. Your work has been incredibly impactful in my life, which I greatly appreciate, and I'm excited to share it with all the coaches out there today. I want to start with just asking you a little bit about your journey. What brought you into leadership coaching and specifically this niche of somatic coaching, so much so that you even felt compelled to go out there and write a book about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, thanks for having me. As I was saying in the pre-show, really excited to be here and talk with you all about teams and cultures and leadership and in sports in particular, because my life started as an athlete. I grew up as a synchronized swimmer and skier and competed at a really high level in swimming, big part of my life. That did not mean that I was good at other things in my life, like making decisions about what was important to me or communicating well when I was upset about things or that kind of thing. And so that was true. And then there was also this stream of my life, sort of college and post-college. What am I going to do with my life? And for me, that was a very sort of harrowing, treacherous journey of a lot of difficult decision-making. It just wasn't clear to me along the way what choices to make. Very slowly, I stumbled my way into coaching and felt like I had found a certain kind of home. And I'm not going to take you through all the many detours on that journey, but just to say that once I got into a place where my job and my role was to listen to people and help them perform at their best, I was doing essentially what I had done all my life, because as an athlete in my sport, a lot of what we did was coach each other. We spent a lot of time peer coaching. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it felt at home for me. But then it really started to feel at home when I entered into this realm of somatic coaching. So when I was in college, I had studied the intersection between biology and psychology. So that's like on an individual level, but then also at a community level, the intersection between ecology and anthropology, how cultures affect nature and vice versa. So I kind of had this very holistic kind of education in college. And when I found a somatic approach to coaching, which is, to briefly define it, a very experiential, embodied, physically oriented approach to shifting behavior changing leadership capacity, all of a sudden I was like, oh, now my academic experience makes sense as well. So I had found home sort of personally based on some of my personal experiences, but then I was able to kind of interweave all of my academic understanding. And why did I write a book about it? Because even though that was the case, and I had found like this thing that totally changed my life for the better, and I could see it was changing other people's lives for the better, I was like, I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why, when I sit a different way, do I behave a different way? Like, does not compute. And there's a certain way in which, like, my natural skepticism that was really irritated, like a piece of sand in an oyster turning into a pearl, right? It was like, just, it bothered me. And I felt like I needed to go figure it out. And that was the genesis of Your Body is Your Brain, the book.
Well, I really appreciate that you have a background in sports. I think it might help some of our conversation today. I want to kind of come back to this idea around the word somatic, right? So I think most people listening to this podcast, they know about IQ, and most of them definitely know about EQ, emotional intelligence. So they've heard about those phrases, but this word somatic intelligence, people hear that and they're going, what's that? So can you give a bit more of a description around what is it, somatic intelligence? What does it mean to grow that? Why is that it's so important for leaders today to know what that is and to actually be working at that?
Yeah. So the way I've heard somatic described most succinctly is it's a very holistic term. So we think about it in some ways as like almost a medical term, like psychosomatic. If it's psychosomatic, it's kind of nothing, right? Is what we imagine. But the word as it was originally defined was actually meant to encompass the whole person, meaning kind of socially, emotionally, intellectually, even your spiritual self, like having a moral compass, right, was part of your somatic sensibility. And I think that's a really useful way to understand the word. The way that I kind of refer to it in Your Body is Your Brain, and I actually don't use the word somatic a lot, even though it's right there in the subtitle. What I really mean by somatic intelligence is your capacity for experiential knowing, right? So that's a very felt sense physical knowing. And as athletes, we're actually really good at tuning into our felt sense physical knowing, right? Musicians as well will learn where to place their fingers on the keyboard or the strings to bring forth a certain note. And that's a very physical practice, in the same way that getting the ball into the basket is a physical practice. And so in the same way, we might find that holding someone accountable actually has a physical component to that practice. It means you have to show up in a certain way that may, for example, make you uncomfortable or make you exhilarated. Discomfort and exhilaration have physical components to them, right? So however you approach holding someone accountable, there's some underlying, this is how it feels for me to do that, right? And then when the closer you get to this is how it feels for me, this is the experience of what it's like to hold someone accountable, to say no and disappoint someone, to award someone something that where they feel a little uncomfortable receiving an award, to give someone difficult feedback that they're not ready to hear, right? Any of these kinds of things that we need to do in our roles as leaders in the world, and certainly as coaches of teams. It's amazing actually how much our body plays a role in all of that we just sort of are clueless about. I was clueless about for a very long time.
Amanda, there's so many things I want to say or ask or learn. First, when you were giving your introduction and you were talking about the way your sport experience then morphed into your academic experience and how they all kind of made sense at one point. And you did this little like shimmy as you said the word home. And when I think about a somatic way of being, a very integrated felt sense of home almost and wholeness from which to then approach the word. And then you mentioned this experiential knowing, which especially in the work that I do as a facilitator, I hear so often about experiential learning. And yet what you're talking about is almost a culmination of that learning to the point that then you can experience the world differently. Knowing how incredibly important this is, and also how holistic and wholesome and I don't know, invigorating it is to operate from this space. If someone had no idea how to begin their journey of becoming more aware, where would awareness start for you, for an individual that's like, oh yeah, that sounds amazing. How do I do that? How do I get there?
Yeah. That's a great question. So one of the things that I want to say is that it really helps to have a knowledgeable friend or guide or coach. So I'm going to give you a very precise example. You just said to me, oh, when I said I found home, I did this little shimmy in my body. I didn't know that. That's unconscious. I wasn't aware of that. But if we have a sort of a skilled outside observer who can help us go, check that shimmy out that you just did, right? What does it feel like to be at home? And I can go, oh, there's like a settling in. I actually feel my weight in my seat a little bit more. But because we're not accustomed to seeing ourselves in this way, it can be really hard to get started just on our own. It doesn't mean it's impossible. And I'm going to say in a minute how you can. But I just want to emphasize, like, it really, really helps to be on this journey with someone else, even if you're just like, hey, let's both learn more about this, read this book, listen to this podcast, whatever. Let's both learn more about this and help each other, right? Even if it's as simple as that. So if you want to kind of take the very, very first step all on your own, what I would suggest, one of the things that I write and talk a lot about is embodied self-awareness. So embodied self-awareness is distinct from something called conceptual self-awareness. It's our awareness of kind of our own story, our own history, and maybe where we're going in the future. Embodied self-awareness is the awareness that, for example, a cat has when its tail has been stepped on, right? It has a knowing and awareness that its tail has been stepped on. That's not a linguistic knowing. That's not an intellectual knowing. If you bang your shin on the coffee table, that's an embodied self-awareness, right? So the thing to cultivate is a way of paying attention to your visceral experience and your position in space. So that little wiggle I gave was a little bit of like my position in space changed. But again, something that happened unconsciously on my part. And in fact, neurobiologically, we are wired to filter that out, to not pay attention to our own interior experience, because the world around us is changing a whole bunch and we need to be able to respond to that. Most interior things we can put on autopilot, and we do. The brain is designed to work that way. That's smart. That's good. But it makes it a little hard to dial up your own embodied self-awareness without help. So one of the things that you can do is to start to make a list of sensation words, right? So what are all the physical sensations that you know you can have from the inside? Well, temperature, you might feel a certain weightiness or heaviness or lightness. You might feel movement in certain parts of your body. Start to make a list of those words, keep it in front of you, and then multiple times a day at random times a day, just set your alarm, stop and circle one of those words and go, oh, here's my interior experience now. Then you can start, as you get better at this, you can start to bring it into those more challenging situations, like, oh, I'm having a difficult conversation now. And as you bring it into those more challenging situations, there are other things we can talk about of how you can counteract the kinds of discomfort or, disturbing sensations that might arise in difficult conversations.
You're talking about this embodied awareness. First off, those are some really great, simple little tips there for coaches to start to make some strides in this. You make some pretty strong claims around the benefits of this type of work. And I know there's a lot of coaches going, okay, this is different. But I know, and even just in the subtitle of your book, you say it will help you to find purpose, build resilience, deepen relationships, and lead more powerfully. I don't know of a leader out there in the world that doesn't want those things.
Yeah.
So is there a story of some leaders that you might have worked with that have done this work? What has it meant to them? What does it help them to overcome in their leadership challenges that they face every day?
Yeah.
How has it helped them to make this positive step forward as a leader?
Okay, great. I do want to tell some stories, and I also want to share a little bit about what the research shows about what happens across hundreds of people, right? When we look at what does it mean to dial up your embodied self-awareness. So let me talk about a woman who, this just happens to be actually two stories coming to mind. So one is a woman who she went to work at an organization that many of us would have heard of, an organization that has very worldwide influence. I can't say who it is, but just think like worldwide influence, fairly small organization, kind of philanthropic in nature. And she knew that to be effective in her role, she had to make herself very visible to people that you read about in the papers every day. She's not a person you read about in the papers every day, right? So she was very uncomfortable with the idea of being visible in this way, being seen, putting her ideas forth, putting her ideas on the table. And one of the things that we worked on together was exploring when and where in her life might she have experienced some sense of comfort or ease around visibility. And she chose an experience in her life that she had had. So this was someone who lived in North America, but she had traveled in the Serengeti Desert at some previous point in her life. And I haven't been there, but apparently it's vast and wide open plains. And she really had this feeling of standing there and just being visible from all angles. And it was, for her, a moment of inspiration in her life. Not because she felt visible, but it was just she was having a very inspiring experience on this trip in general. And so she chose that as kind of a metaphor for this feeling of vastness surrounding her and this openness that she just felt a certain kind of comfort and inspiration there. So she put a picture of the Serengeti from that trip on her desk, and she stopped several times a day. And we worked on physically changing her posture to match what it was like when she was there standing in the desert in that particular moment. And what that usually meant was, from her regular everyday situation, it usually meant kind of dropping her shoulders, widening across her chest, and lifting her eyes to the horizon, right? And of course, a lot of us know, like, if we're in front of a computer, which you're not necessarily when you're like on the, pitch coaching something, but there are there's times when you're like curled over your work, right? And she was an office worker and spent a lot of her days curled over her work. So to kind of open up that experience of visibility, what happened for her is she started to get more and more bold with the ideas that she put forth. And it was something that she practiced many times a day outside of the meetings with these sort of very well-known people. And she was able to kind of step in a more courageous way. And interestingly, the other story that's coming to mind is actually kind of similar, in that it was a gentleman who felt very intimidated by the people he was working with, and found a way of kind of both opening his shoulders and accompanying that with a phrase that he found that occurred to him on a walk with his son, where he put his small son up on his shoulders and was walking up the mountain and really felt like, I'm here to support and to serve. And so he had a phrase that he used, my purpose is service. And again, for him as well, it was an opening across the chest. And he was able to step into meetings and conversations with people he felt intimidated by in a whole different way by starting to embody this idea, my purpose is service, which was like a phrase and a physical change that allowed him to show up differently. And I'll tell a third story because it's just, those two are kind of similar. A woman that I worked with that she really wanted to set boundaries more clearly at work. So she would get overloaded and then she would just constantly say yes to it. And at the same time, very shortly after I started working with her, she had a family member fall ill. And this was a family member that she had had a fairly long history of kind of difficult relationship with and big boundary issues. So she kind of shifted the struggle from her workplace life to her personal life, but it was ultimately the same struggle. And we worked on how to physically feel like you're setting a boundary. And one of the things that we played around with was having her take a rolling chair and push it away from her so that she could physically make space, right? And she also had a phrase that I don't now remember precisely her words, but it was a phrase like no, or I need space, or something along those lines. And with this family member, she started to, with this sort of physical practice accompanied by a phrase, she started to be able to show up more and more often with this family member to say, I'm here to take care of your needs now. She really was kind of the only person to do that. And I need to be home by 8 p.m. or I'm having dinner with my family tonight or whatever that may be. And then it very slowly, as she worked on this in her personal life, which was significant, slowly started to make its way into her workplace as well. So that by the time we finished working together over maybe 6 months or so, she was starting to incorporate those lessons about boundaries into her workplace and be able to say, like, I can do that, but if you want me to do that, I'm gonna have to drop this other thing. What's the priority here?
First of all, you're so cool. This is amazing. And I'm delighted that we get to learn from you in this space. I'm thinking as you're talking about, the woman in the picture of the Serengeti and what allows us to feel more spacious, especially or more powerful or capable in spaces where we might feel the opposite or other. And thinking about my most anxious moments are before speaking to large audiences, particularly where I know the audience is very, very familiar with who I am and I don't know anybody. And it's like, you're in this space, right? So for me, the ocean has always been a place of perspective and peace and thinking about conversation. And even though I might be on stage speaking, that the information, the conversation is flowing in and out, much like the waves do. There's a phrase that I read in the opening of Love Warrior by Glennon Doyle, and it was a Joan of Arc quote, and it said, I was born to do this. Mm-hmm. And that's what I say to myself to reaffirm purpose, because I do not feel like this is happening because of me. It's happening through me in service of the audience, the client, etc. When I first read the book, Leadership Embodiment, I believe by Wendy Palmer, I was fascinated by this idea of the way that we sit and stand influences the way we think and speak, even so much of, if we're trying to become a better listener, turning our palms up wherever they happen to be, whether resting on our thighs or by our side. What have you noticed about yourself, Amanda, as you've started to do this work? In what ways have you felt yourself shift or change to become more embodied as you go about this kind of coaching?
Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful question. Thank you for that. I also have what you describe of kind of standing up and speaking in front of an audience of people who might know me, but I don't necessarily know them. That's always intense, right? There's a lot of energy coming at you. And so that's been something that I've had to learn and to embody differently in a way that is very similar to what you describe, right? That I'm just here as a vessel to kind of let this story flow through me to whoever needs to hear it. And that's been a big change. I think one of the other, I would say two, gosh, it's actually so many, but I'll share at least a couple others. One is I have gotten way more, I don't know that I would say comfortable, but way more willing to take risks on behalf of what I care about. And I mean that in a professional sense, right? So if there's something that I'm up to professionally in the world that I believe needs doing or saying, and I have something to contribute there, I've become a lot more willing to kind of roll the dice and go, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to try this, or I'm going to offer this, or I'm going to invite this, right? Whatever the thing may be. And that's been something that I used to be incredibly timid around and extremely perfectionistic around. If you hang out with me a lot, you would know I'm still pretty perfectionistic to my own detriment, but it's changed a lot, so that I'm much more willing to make risks, to, you know, fall flat on my face, to kind of blow it in public on behalf of something that's sort of a larger, something larger. And the other thing that I would say is I've gotten a lot more closely aligned with what it is I care about, right? Like I may have had ideas about that before, or been uncertain about what that was before because I got pulled in different directions by different people telling me, you know, or sending sort of subliminal messages about what should be important. So I've been able to, by kind of tuning into this felt sense, get a lot more clear about, oh, this is what matters. This is what my priority is. And to really put my energies behind that as opposed to kind of dissipated in service of what other people want, which may be really valid and legitimate, but may not sort of align with my best gifts or skills or whatever that might be. And then I'm going to say a third thing, which is, and I'm saying this in part because, Betsy, I know you focus a lot on communications. I have become so much better at just telling the truth. And that might sound like I spent a lot of my life lying. That's not really true. But some of us, some listeners may relate to the experience of like, oh, there's something to say inside me, but I'm really uncomfortable saying it. And I'm just going to swallow my words because what a risk it would be to say, you know, this risky thing, right? I love you, or no, or, you know, fill in the blank of whatever the risky thing is that you need to say, or that feels risky, right? So in that sense, I feel like I've become, I would say more true to myself and more honest. And that has improved all of my relationships all across the board.
All these examples you've shared with these other leaders, and even in your own life, you know, your ability to take more risks, to tell the truth, you know, these other leaders that comfortable with visibility, even just talking earlier about the challenges of holding people accountable. These are real leadership challenges. And why I'm so drawn to your work and is because I think for so much of my time coaching coaches, I was trying to always give them a tool, some trick to overcome maybe this obstacle of them holding somebody accountable. And yeah, sometimes the tools, the tips, you know, the tricks would work, but we'd always sometimes come back to this exact same place. And it was something was getting in the way for them. And what you're talking about is, it's not some leadership tool or leadership hack. It's much more meaningful, I think, at the end of the day. But it's harder work. I don't know if you could speak to that.
Yeah, you know what? It is harder work. So I don't want to knock the tips and tricks and hacks. I think they're really important. It helps to have a tool that says, when you're holding somebody accountable, here's a way you can approach it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's some words you can say. Like, if that's not a skill that you've developed in life, it really helps to have someone who's an expert in that say, let me help you. Here are some steps. The problem is, if we bring ourselves to that with all of the trepidation or the anger and blame or the, uncertainty that we have around holding someone accountable, all of that is going to shine through, right? It's just going to emanate right on out of us. So you're using all the words, but you're still, kind of being a jerk, or you're still pulling your punches and not really having an effect, right? So how we show up is just as important, if not more important, than those kinds of tools and tips. And it's important to have the tools, but they are always influenced by who we are in it. And this is the who we are in it part. And so what I want to say about the hard work of it is two things. One, it is harder, and also it can be simple. If I don't want to say easy, but it can be simple. So the way that it's harder is like, it's the difference between opening a window or constructing a new, bigger window, right? So the tips and tools are like, let me just open the window and I can, let some fresh air in. But actually, this window is really small. It doesn't really cool the room well enough, right? So I need to build a bigger space for the window, install a new window. That means, like, if I don't have the skills, then I need to go shop for a contractor. I need to measure windows. It's a whole bigger project, right? And you're going to have to put some things on hold while you're like making a hole in the wall. So that's a little bit the analogy, right? It's the difference between sort of tips and tricks and embodying something. And it takes some time to embody something, but it can be simple. And for those of us who know how to practice, which any of us in sports do, we can get really good at this really fast. So the challenging part is figuring out, what do I need to practice to make it easier to hold someone accountable, right? And it might be a little bit of those tips and tricks, but it might also be like, I'm just going to say, like, let's say you're timid holding someone accountable. And what you need to practice is having some backbone, right? So part of that is like, I'm going to invite you guys to do this right now. Like, can you feel the front side of your spine, the part that makes contact with your organs? It's a little confusing, right? Like, can I really feel that part of I don't know if I can feel that part of my body. Betsy, you're nodding. JP, you're going, right?
Well, I'm not sure actually if I'm visualizing it more than feeling it, but like I do, it's like, oh no, it's the front side, not the back side. We're just, we're flipping it around and now it's kind of tickling all the things it would touch from the inside.
Like, let me move around a little bit and go like, where is the front side of my spine? I don't know. I don't really think about that part of me very much. And then can you let that, even if it's just even if you're, in quotes, feeling it in your imagination. So all of a sudden you're thinking about a part of your body that you don't necessarily often think about. See if you can, from that front side of your spine, let your spine just be its natural height. So you're neither collapsed, but nor are you like reaching, stretching up. You're just allowing your spine to have its really natural length. What's happening? You're both smiling.
This is like a magic trick. Because I can feel without efforting. I almost feel like I'm relaxing, but getting taller or like more upright, which you didn't ask for that. And it's not like, drop your shoulders, stand up straight. But when you said, let it assume its natural height, it's like, oh yeah, this is way more spacious, which is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. JP,
yeah, I'm feeling more of just kind of an opening all throughout my entire chest and my stomach, honestly, because like Betsy said, you're just naturally kind of extending, I guess. You're not even trying to, but you just naturally do that.
Right. So just, if you just now, I don't want to take you here for too long, but like if you were timid and feeling a little uncomfortable about holding someone accountable, like feel that in your body and go there. Like, what would timid feel like? What would the shape of timidity be? What would happen to your spine that might be a little bit different? Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Betsy, all of a sudden I saw your neck get shorter.
It's like a protective, almost like curling in, not full fetal, but like down and then a little bit away. Like, I'm not sure.
Not quite facing it head on.
I don't really want to be here. So yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel, I'm definitely shrinking like Betsy said, but I also just feel the stomach tightening now too. Cause it's just, I'm almost curling over here, you know?
Yeah. So if you go back to just paying attention to that front side of your spine, letting it be its natural height. And then if you were my client, either one of you, we'd be looking for some phrase that might support you in holding someone accountable. So it might be, it's my job to do this, or it might be for the good of the team, or it might be honesty in relationships, right? Like it so much depends on your own personal situation, which is why it's good to have someone to help you. And if you can find a way to like, okay, so I said it's simple. You develop a simple practice like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lengthen my spine and I'm going to have this phrase. And then when it's time for me to hold someone accountable, I've done that 100,000 times already, right? Like if that's the high stakes moments, if that's the Olympic moment, if that's the March Madness moment, if that's the Super Bowl, right? Holding someone accountable, you have work to do before you get there. So find the very low stakes way to practice. And this, as athletes, we know how to do, right? And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It can just be multiple times a day. I'm going to do this particular move, opening my chest, raising my eyes to the horizon, lengthening my spine, feeling my feet on the floor, sinking my weight into the chair, relaxing my back, right? Whatever it is for you, I'm going to practice that. I'm going to remind myself why I'm practicing it, how it's tied to what I care about. And then I'm going to do that again and again and again and again and again until I've built the muscle memory to, in the Olympic moment, pull it off.
This is the question is coming up for me now. And I just love the activity that you took us through real quick. I imagine myself as a roly-poly type of thing, hunching over there, cowering, I still haven't found the phrase to kind of stand tall or whatever, but I was thinking of some stuff there, but that was really powerful. So I appreciate that. My question is, why does this work? Like so much of performance is like, oh, it's just close your eyes and think it's all in the head. But as your book talks about, your body is your brain. I think your course is called, body equals brain, why does this work?
So that became my obsession. That's why I wrote the book. Cause I was like, what? Why does this work? That's stupid. Like that doesn't make any sense. And so there's a bunch of neurobiology about why it works. But I think the thing that is like the bottom line, simple answer to that question is we are unified beings. We are not just a mind. We are not just a body. And our body and mind, although we use different words to talk about those aspects of our experience, they are not separate in any way, which is why visualizing yourself on the court, hitting the perfect backhand, actually works to help you hit the perfect backhand, right? It's because there is we get confused that body and mind are somehow separate because our language makes them, we describe them as separate. We have different words to talk about them. And there is a distinct experiential difference, I'll say, between thinking and sensing, right? Those are different kind of channels by which we might know the world. So we talk about them differently, we categorize them differently, but they are always mutually interactive. And you can't undo that. You can't undo that in our neurobiology. We're built that way as a biological organism. And you can't seem to do that philosophically. I mean, people have been trying for centuries and millennia to sort of sort this out and continually come back to the fact that we're holistic beings. It's just how it is.
Yeah, there's something I have to ask about that. All right, so we're going to break there in our conversation with Amanda Blake. This work is so important, the somatic work. Oftentimes when we are stuck in life, we are looking for some new tool or trick to make a change. But yet it's something deeper within us that is creating obstacles for us making that change or showing up more intentionally, being more connected or more purposeful in our work and in our lives. We can all benefit from this somatic work. I know it personally and in some of the leaders that I've coached already. So be sure to check out Amanda's work at embodied.org. Also, her book, Your Body is Your Brain. Every coach I've recommended this to has thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks for listening into today's podcast. If you're interested in growing your somatic intelligence and with your team, you're not going to want to miss next week's episode. So be sure to hit the subscribe button on this podcast so you don't miss next week's episode. When you get a chance, also, please leave us a review. We have thousands of listeners each week to this podcast. We're grateful for you all listening in, and we'd be extra grateful if you just took 30 seconds to leave us a review. It helps to continue to make this podcast possible.